Good day, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Rob Westervelt, editor of Chemical Week, and I'm delighted to be joined by some industry experts to hear about the latest CW webinar on the chemical logistics crisis. Gulf Coast congestion following significant U.S. capacity increases, as well as driver shortages and operational changes at the big rail providers as they work to seek to improve efficiency and margins requires a new approach. And we have a great panel today to assess those challenges and outline what chemical makers can do to mitigate rail, ocean, and trucking constraints in this environment. We're joined by Chuck Deise, who is Argo's Senior Vice President and Partner for the Chemical Process Industry Practice, Clarence Gooden, who is former President and Vice Chairman of CSX, Bruce Work, who is Argo Vice President for Supply Chain and Logistics. And before I turn it over to Chuck, some housekeeping notes. We expect the presentation to run about 40 minutes, so there will be time for Q&A. Please enter the questions in the window on the upper left-hand corner of your browser. We'll get to as many questions as possible, and please send them in during the event and the presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Chuck. Chuck.
Great. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate the intro. Hello, everyone. My name is Chuck Deise. I lead the Chemical Process Industry Global Practice for Argo. And Bruce is also on, who leads our supply chain practice. But I would say the most important person on this call is Clarence Gooden. And we are very fortunate to have Clarence join us today. Clarence is the former CEO of CSX. The nice thing about that is you're going to hear today from an insider, right? So who's been in the industry and has now been on both sides. And actually, he's one of our board members. So we're delighted that Clarence is going to join us on this call and provide his perspective. Just to give you a little sense of the agenda, so I'll give you a background on us, just for information. We'll talk a little bit about the industry challenges. Clarence will talk about his perspective, what's going on, right? I mean, and I would say more of a balanced view from the rail side, right? And also how it's affecting chemicals. So he's been in the industry 47 years and has a lot of experience in rail, ocean, and trucking, and he'll provide that view. And then Bruce will talk a little bit about what companies are doing to prepare and mitigate, right, some of these current challenges. We live in interesting times, I would say, and the worlds are colliding around some mega trends that I think the companies on this call need to be concerned about. And as Rob said, then we'll open it up for Q&A. So that's the plan, and look forward to chatting with you over the next hour. So a little bit of background. What you see on the screen are a couple of articles here. 2 weeks ago, Chemical Week, their featured cover story and content was around logistics in chemical. And I would say when Chemical Week talks about these issues, they're real and they're relevant. So, just to be aware, right? And I think that, I would say there are two articles here that specifically focus on this area. And if you're interested, if you don't have these or you're interested, my contact information is on here. Just reach out. I would be happy to make sure that you get copies of these. One talks about the broader logistics challenges and mitigate and what companies are doing to mitigate. And the second is a deeper dive into rail. And I think in particular in the chemical industry, as most of the folks on this call know, rail is the area that needs some attention, right? And that'll be a big focus of our call today. So a little bit about Argo Consulting that I think would be of interest. So Argo we're a global operations improvement consulting firm, works across industries. Our focus is all around driving operational performance and improving EBITDA. Our makeup of our company is basically senior experts, folks from the industry or other large consulting firms. I tend to say gray hair, no hair, people that have been there, done that, that can come in and make an impact. And I would say that's how we differentiate ourselves. A real strong focus on operational excellence in manufacturing and supply chain. Logistics is a key area for us. We've been, Consulting Magazine does a little survey every year, and we've been ranked sort of tops in this area for the 9th consecutive year. Separately, you can go off and sort of look at that. I'd say one of the things that makes us unique is we actually have a large transportation practice where we work with a lot of these rail companies, and the people that are in our company or our consultants are ex-rail folks who have been on the inside, right, and understand their business models and how they make their money, right? So the beauty of that is when we work with our clients, we can help mitigate that. We bring that capability, and I'd say also that from a chemical perspective, that's our largest industry, the chemical process industry. We're doing a lot of work in that space. You can see some of the logos down below, companies we work with. I would say that again, our Argo is all about bringing experts, right? So when companies come to us, it's all around accelerating change, and that's sort of what we're known for. So that's what you get with Argo. And then I'd say the third area would be, we've built something I think we're really proud of and is unique. We call it the Best Run Chemical Operations Playbook. And the beauty of that is we can walk into a company, be it operation, manufacturing, be it maintenance reliability, be it logistics, with a point of view around how to drive change, what the issues are, what the best practices are to sort of mitigate that and drive performance improvement, and the strategy for that is. And it allows us to really hit the ground running. We've been fortunate enough to have a senior advisory board of top executives, operations executives from Dow and DuPont and Exxon Chemicals, and a few others who help us put this together. And it's been a big accelerator for us. So that's who we are. Let me move on to industry challenges. So here's a little bit of background I think that sort of sets up Clarence and provides a perspective. So the concern, and I think the concern is across chemical. It's both specialty and commodity, right? It's as well as I would say sort of downstream chemical and some of the more batch packaged products. What we see, and I'm sure you guys see because you've joined this webcast, is there are a number of interesting factors sort of coming together. In our view, would be the industry's at an inflection point. You certainly hear about geopolitical uncertainty, right? Tariffs and China and some of the challenge, and actually the world in tariffs, some of the challenges there. There's been talk of an economic downturn. We all are aware of the Gulf Coast buildup, right? And capital buildup is huge. And as a result, think about rail, think about trucking and ocean in terms of carrier congestion and port congestion. Driver shortages, we'll talk about that, but the big issue these days. And last issue is, hey, the rail guys are making money. They've changed their model, and the folks that are paying for it are those people on the call today, right? It's big chemical, it's shipping products, and we'll give you some numbers to show you how that's impacting margins in the chemical industry. In particular, the chemical industry, I would say, as you know, is a very complex. Supply chains are very complex, right? It's heavily regulated, and it's all about shipping safe products. So I think certainly that presents some unique challenges, and these factors today have a heavy influence on chemical. The other interesting thing I think we find is as a result of what I just discussed, we sort of have a view around top quartile performance, and I'd say that most of the companies we're working with, as a result of these factors, are certainly I would say have a ways to go to get there, right? They are I would say in general, companies we're working with are starting to realize that, hey, wait a minute, this is a big opportunity for us. And we need to get more aggressive in terms of the way that we, drive our logistics strategy and our transportation strategy and optimize that, right? So most companies that have a lot of opportunity in terms of getting to these benchmarks here. The other point I'd say is chemical in general is all about volume, rate, and quality, right? So certainly delivering it safely. But I'd say that, production has been king. And while logistics is important, I think we find, and as we talk to folks in general, the logistics tends to be sort of I kind of use the word afterthought. Now maybe that's a little harsh, but it's not the first area of focus within a chemical company, right? And I think as a result of some of the challenges that we see today, companies are starting to change that, right? And it needs to change. The other factor there is aging workforce, right? Not only in production, but in logistics. A lot of the planning is done at the plant level. And a lot of the folks that have that experience are retiring, right? So we see that also, and there's a huge gap there in terms of driving that change, right, and retaining that knowledge. So our big picture, I think we'd say that there's opportunity here to mitigate risk, improve service, spend in working capital, and we would say, hey, there's a compelling event here that we think, the folks on this call need to be thinking about and need to be acting on, right? So I think that's sort of the big picture. So let me sort of step it down a little bit into each of the areas. I'll sort of talk a little bit about precision railroading. This is the big concern for the industry, right? You see a couple of quotes here, and you recognize certainly these individuals and these organizations. So the ACC has been very vocal about precision railroading, the effect on chemical. The demurrage and other fees, accessorial charges, are a big concern. Profit, I would say, on the other hand, profitability for the chemical guys has improved, and we'll show you some numbers. There's a fellow by the name of Hunter Harrison who sort of started this movement years ago up in Canada at CP and CN, and it's all about optimizing the rail assets so they can be more efficient and actually provide better customer service. But the net effect is it's all about making money, right? And it's improving profitability of the rail assets. And I think the concern is while that's going on, chemical is impacted, right? So that's big picture. Mike Lacey at Solvay, who we work very closely with, by the way, was recently up on the Hill and talked a little bit about some of these issues. And his view would be it's the most problematic issue in transportation right now for chemicals. So, hey, the good news is the ACC and some of the large chemical companies realize this and are trying to drive change, right? So I think the other factor to be aware of, and you guys that are working in chemical, you're certainly aware of this, right? So the rail has been an asset that in the past has really been a rolling storage for lots of chemical companies, right? So as we work with chemical processing companies, their yards tend to have lots of rail cars, raw material, work in process, finished goods, and it's basically where you don't have a silo or warehouse, it's in a rail car, right? So that's been the operating model in many of the cases in the chemical industry. But what I'd say that as a result of these charges, right, that operating model has become extremely costly. And I would say that up until recently, I think that there now is an awakening that, hey, wait a minute, there's significant cost of these rail assets in our yards, right, as well as some of the switching costs from the rail carriers. And, we need to be smarter about the way we run our logistics and our rail operations, right? So utilization of those assets, decreasing dwell time has become top of mind. I'd also say that in general, the industry is beginning to realize they need to get leaner with their asset management strategies, and in many cases are working it internally or coming to folks like us for help, right, with these strategies, which I think is becoming a high priority for most chemical companies today. So I would say, the other point is that this is not only chemical. The trends that I talked about earlier, right, apply broadly, and I'm sure you see the same. Trucking would be a great example. So, in addition to the Gulf Coast build out and congestion there, and some of the other factors, I think the other interesting factor there is driver shortage. What we see, and I I'm out in the field, meeting with chemical executives and talking to folks. Hey, the messaging coming back to me is there are drivers that are they're not showing up. They're walking off the job. And they're doing this because they're moving to other companies to, they can make more money, right? So, and as a result, that's companies are missing shipments, right? Or they're not receiving the proper raw material, and that's becoming pretty huge. In fact, the truck recovery business is booming. I was in an airport recently, and had actually talking to some folks, and that was their business, right? And it's huge. They go out and recover these trucks as a result of these drivers walking off, right? And a lot of these assets are chemical assets they're recovering. So something you need to be concerned about, I would say. And then similarly applies in ocean freight. Port congestion, and the other dynamic I think in ocean freight is, we also see a lot of companies as a result of some of these geopolitical issues looking at Plan B in terms of their access to markets and looking at building out infrastructure in some non-China locations. And in those situations, right, the port infrastructure isn't as efficient or in place as it is perhaps on the Gulf Coast, right? So that presents a whole different set of challenges. So anyway, long story short, our view would be this is an area that needs some attention. And I'm going to turn it over to Clarence to talk about, his perspective from being on the inside and what's going on. And then Bruce will wrap it up with what some of the best companies are doing to, in fact, attack this problem. Thank you. Clarence?
Okay, thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Rob. I appreciate it. I saw many people that were attending this afternoon as I've worked with over the years, and I'd like to welcome you back. Some of the chemical customers here I dealt directly with. I noticed that was on the call when I was working as the Chief Commercial Officer at CSX. So it looked to me, as I was asked to come here and to speak with you this afternoon, that the issues, although there were many, that they seemed to basically revolve around the speed at which precision scheduled railroading was being implemented by the rails. The second was the demurrage, the storage, and the interplant switch charge. Third was the accuracy of bills. The fourth would be the bunching that's caused by the rail delays, both operational delays as well as regular weather delays. But it looked at me at the end of the day that the real problem, and I think in those the two articles that Chuck offered you as he started his presentation, this is discussed in more detail before the STB, but the nucleus of the problem had been around the rail's erratic service. Now, these rail carriers are getting a lot richer, and somebody is paying for that. And what this slide shows here, and it's sourced from Progressive Railroading, are the ancillary charges that were reported in the 10-K reports to the Securities and Exchange Commission by the railroads. And the ancillary charges, supplemental revenues, and all would be included in these numbers. So demurrage, storage, intermodal storage, liquidated damages would also be in these categories. But what you effectively see here is that from 2017 there to 2018, a $273 million increase, a 29% increase in fees that the rails have reported. When I first showed this chart to some people, there was discussion around, well, NS's charges appear to be flat. They implemented precision scheduled railroading, but you will notice that NS has changed their tariff in September of this year. CSX changed their tariff the year before. Canadian National could easily make the argument that precision scheduled railroading is in fact working because they've had their precision scheduled railroading in now for a couple of decades, if you will, and their charges are the lowest, indicating the discipline has gotten into the process. And I think J.J. Ray, the CEO, summed it up in this week's earnings announcement when he said, precision scheduled railroading is in our DNA at CN, and we intend to keep those principles going forward. CP, likewise, although has made an increase, CP reported to the Surface Transportation Board that they had not increased their charges since 2015. I would remind you that Hunter Harrison went to the CP before that, and CP had in fact changed some of those charges during that period of time, and KCS has yet to get their process fully implemented. But the point I hope you'll walk away from this slide is that companies like Argo are in a unique position, particularly with their more senior and experienced consultants, to come into your different businesses and use processes, lean processes, to work with you to enable you to reduce these costs. Now let's look at what precision scheduled railroading is. You're going to hear all kind of different deals about it. I read Hunter's book early on. Probably should have adopted some of his principles before we did. But the fact of it is that the operating principles of it are pretty sound. If you operate safely, if you improve your customer service, if you control your costs, if you optimize your asset utilization, and you value and develop your employees, then what you in turn would produce would flow into a low-cost product with reliable service, and the result, in theory, results in a larger market share. How can we be against that? Operate safely. It's good for the rail, it's good for the customer, it's good for the public, and it's good for cost control. How do you argue with improved service? Predictable, consistent, helps reduce the assets. It's in fact part of cost control, both operating costs as well as capital costs. And to optimize asset utilization, in my view, is for the long-term viability of both enterprises, the shipper as well as the rail. And if you look at some of the most recent earning reports, KCS reduced their cars online by almost 4,000. Canadian National, coming off of some of the difficulties they had in 2 prior years, after having spent $3.5 to $4 billion each year in capital, is able to take another 5,000 rail cars out of their system. To value and develop employees, important to all parties. And in this slide right here, one of the arrows is not exactly right here. The optimized asset utilization is going to lower your lease costs as well as have a low cost approach to capacity. This morning I was looking at a show on CNBC, and they were reporting the earnings of Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines had very good earnings. Southwest Airlines has been the most affected airline by the 737 MAX shutdown. And what was interesting about it is that the major airlines, and think about this, have compressed capacity. They have compressed capacity. You very rarely get on an airplane today that's not full. And that's exactly what has happened over the years to the railroads. In my 47 years, I spent most of it downsizing. And in 2004, demand exceeded capacity. And that's when rail rates started to rise. Capacity is the enemy of price. If you have too much capacity, you won't get price for your product. And that's true in any marketplace. So the rails, the airlines have all adopted compressed capacity. And when you don't put in additional capacity through additional track, whatever, then you have to develop other ways to get that capacity. And that's what I think that you're seeing happening on the railroads. One of the guiding principles of precision scheduled railroading is to handle the cars as few times as you can and to run them in longer trains, maximizing the horsepower per trailing ton metric. How many horsepower does it take, the least amount I can use to pull the amount of tonnage I have to pull? That is the optimal thing. So yeah, I think you're going to expect longer trains as we go forward. In addition to that, I think you're going to see these carriers, particularly for some of these larger facilities where 40, 50 cars a day are coming out of, customer pre-blocking for the destination. There will continue to be a huge amount of pressure, focus on dwell time, and I think you're going to see transloading of certain products going forward. Houston Ship Channel is not going to be able to handle some of the volumes that the United States chemical industry is going to be throwing at them. The rails are going to pretty much, I think, stick to where they are today in the precision scheduled railroading and in these accessorial charges, because they got so much pressure on them now from Wall Street that the stocks were just tanked. And there's an article I would also suggest that you may want to Google and read. I'll give you a chance to get a little piece of paper and scratch it. It's you can go to STB Demerge and then click on the National Grain and Feed Association's article. It's dated June the 14th this year, and it's written by Randy Gordon, President and Chief Executive Officer. And it is a real synopsis of what the rail's positions were to the STB on some of the demurrage and accessorial charges. But it also, and I think, lays the groundwork for some type of arbitration that the STB may or may not be able to work out between the shippers and the rail carriers. NGFA has had this policy in place for many years. I was very familiar with it, worked with it. It was one of those things that neither side thought was great, so that meant it was probably a pretty good thing. A couple of the rail carriers have already indicated their willingness to sit down and talk about this as a basis from which to start. That's why I suggested maybe you familiarize yourself with that. And with that, I'd like to turn over now to Bruce Work, who's Argo's Vice President of Supply Chain Logistics Practices. But thank you very much for attending today, and I'll be happy and hope to look forward to answering questions here at the end. Thank you.
Clarence, thank you. What an amazing, unique perspective to hear one of the leaders of the larger railroads sharing with you the secret to the profitability of the railroads and how precision railroading has driven wonderful operating ratio improvements for each of these companies over the last 3 years. So there's no reason to believe that it's going away. There's no reason to believe that accessorial and demurrage charges are going to diminish. We can hope that there'll be some regulatory oversight, but we certainly can't budget it, we can't count on it, and we certainly can't plan for it. So as Chuck indicated at the beginning of our discussion today, Argo is an operational improvement company. We don't do grand strategy work. We are roll up your sleeves and get dirty operators. Our team on the rail side is 20 plus years experience across the board. And on the supply chain side, it's a light level of experience. The supply chain crosses with the rail team in several different intersections. And what we have up on the screen today is kind of our view of where the opportunity lies to capture EBITDA. These are practical, attainable, sustainable solutions that we have implemented across hundreds of customers in the chemical processing, petrochemical, and rail space. And what I'd like to do is spend the next few minutes talking you through the 8 big areas of opportunity as we see them, and try to draw practical examples that we've either implemented or seen best-in-class operators execute. So when we think about supply chain and rail, particularly when it comes to chemical processing, we think that as Chuck said earlier, logistics has been kind of an afterthought. Certainly not every company has approached it that way, and very few companies actually believe they've treated it as an afterthought. But further investigation generally reveals that companies are not achieving 14 plus turns and 2.2% transportation cost to cost of goods sold, which are, in our opinion, best-in-class metrics that everyone should be striving for and it has a high probability of achieving. That is our starting point when we talk with new clients. So our first area of opportunity is to start to think about logistics in the bigger picture. Think strategically about how logistics can not only help you reduce costs, but also create better customer service models. So it's the engagement of the supply chain up and down, and starting to keep logistics front and center as you're doing your production planning, your site planning on plants, as you're engaging new customers and figuring out how you're going to service them, putting logistics as a tool to succeed and not as just a cost of doing business. There's a lot of different ways that you can tie the strategy for logistics into these activities, and working with both customers and suppliers to help them reduce their total cost is the easiest incentivized way to make this happen. Everyone's facing the same cost pressures when it comes to the movement of products across the board, and by collaborating with your top suppliers and your top customers on options to reduce costs, on creating win-win metrics for dwell time and turning cars around in rail, for example, or for the amount of time that you have to take to unload either raw materials or finished goods from the truck, is the success factor that we see people in the lead really working on. Now, what is the practical way to achieve that strategy? Our second value point here is an integrated planning process, SIOP. And when we talk SIOP in the chemical space, we generally find logistics is not part of the discussion. The only way for the logistics operation to minimize dwell time, to minimize storage, is to synchronize the availability of move capacity to production availability. So as product is produced, as product is available to ship, it's getting it on wheels and getting it on rail as fast as possible in the most efficient way possible that allows you to reduce working capital and reduce that transportation spend, whether it's the holding of excess cars, whether it's demurrage, or whether it's routing trucks inefficiently because you're not really integrating the plan. So where we see best-in-class operators is they're bringing together, and you'll see this graphic up on the screen right now, they're bringing together each of the operating silos and starting to treat them as a unified team, creating accountability and visibility across the platform from an operation perspective. The SIOP process we've implemented dozens, if not hundreds plus times for chemical processors, other industrials. We seem to find that the limitation in SIOP is the availability and ease of access to information. And what SIOP needs to become is the one true source of information, the only set of facts that people can utilize to run the business. And that process, while somewhat painful, yields substantial rewards almost immediately. So when you think about strategy, how do you begin to execute that strategy? SIOP is what we believe is the key factor in that centralized planning function that ensures that the production is aligned to the availability of raw materials, availability to on-site storage, and the availability to move capacity, getting that product on the rail or on the road as fast as possible. Our third area here is linking operations and logistics together at the hip, ensuring not only that we coordinate the capacity to the production and to the availability of move capacity, but also to the quality of move capacity and the exact specifications of the type of equipment needed to move that product to the end customer downstream. So bringing that into the supply chain is incredibly important. We're seeing a lot of leading companies begin to pool assets as an example of one way to optimize. So they're looking at their rail fleet, they're looking at their utilization of over-the-road equipment, whether it be private fleet or 4PL, and they're looking across the area and finding willing partners to help them figure out how to use that capacity efficiently and effectively without having to have excess equipment stacking up in their yards. It's this ability to get these strategic nature down to a tactical execution point of view that we think is very important. The fourth component here is talking about your partnerships. When we refer to partnerships, we're talking about your providers, your outside providers for low-cost rail repositioning, your over-the-road providers, your rail lines, your railroads, your car providers, your lease providers for your tankers. It's getting those folks integrated into your planning process as much as possible, having regular updates with them, whether that's monthly or quarterly, but sharing dashboards of meaningful metrics so that everyone can understand what they're being held accountable to. Often we find that when we show the true performance with a client to their transportation partners, their first reaction is they don't believe that's the performance. And we painstakingly show them exactly where the information came from. Often it comes directly from the carriers in question or the railroads in question, and they start to see where the performance gaps are, whether it is missed delivery of empty tanks, or if it's missed delivery or missed pickups of tanks that are full, ready to get connected to longer chains and go into the precision railroad world, or if it's the inability to get drivers on power and into your plant to get your tanks filled and on the road. As Chuck said, the driver shortage is not going to go away. Now, it's not so much a shortage as a competition of compensation. There is a shortage of specialty equipment, but there's an excess of standard over-the-road equipment that is competing for that same driver base at increasing wages. So one of the tactics we see is people doing a regular compensation review, both with their over-the-road carriers and in a situation of private fleets, but looking at their driver compensation to ensure they're competitive in the marketplace so that they can retain their drivers. And that competition can be base salary, it can be incentives, it can be onboarding compensation, it can be stay bonuses, a variety of different tools that we help clients use to ensure that they've got people to move their products. The fifth area, and the area that we're probably most proud of, is our rail operations excellence practice. We look at rail operations excellence as kind of inside the fence and outside the fence. From an outside the fence perspective, generally our first step with any client is to actually model the life cycle of their cars from returned empty to returned empty, if you will, at any given plant in their network. We're finding in the chemical processing, the petrochemical world, that cars are dispatched for 120 to 180 days before being returned. That's a lot of asset utilization being left on the table. So our first exercise is to capture each node-to-node movement using both the railroad data and internal data to show where that car was from the moment it returned to the yard to the moment it returned to the yard. How long did it sit? What was the cleaning time, if any? How long did it dwell before getting filled? How long did it take to get filled? How long did it take to get a plant changed? How long to get hooked to a chain? How long did that chain move from point A to point B? How long did your customer hold it in their yard before unload? How long did it take them to get it hooked and sent back to you? Did they use the optimal route for return? All of those factors paint the picture of where the true opportunity lies. And that's what we do to kind of start this process from an outside the fence perspective. And then we engage both carrier, railroads, and customers and try to create mutual metrics for success. From an inside the fence operational perspective, one of the things that we find is generally the most successful and the easiest to implement is an OEE exercise to understand the capacity to fill cars and whether or not all the capacity to fill cars is being utilized. Is every one of the possible sets of fill stations up and running? Has maintenance been taken seriously? Is it current? Is the full capacity of the plant to load available? And if so, is it running 24 hours a day? And if not, what would it take to do that? How do I get those cars turned faster in my own yard? Then we look at some detailed things, whether it be pit crew organization from the internal team to get those cars positioned in the right spot, or looking at how cars are switched in the yard, whether they're being kicked or they're using air to switch, and what are the most efficient ways to do these things given the physical plants in question, the equipment available in question, and the materials being moved. So our inside the fence practice is really based on how do we get these cars turned faster, how do we get them filled faster, how do we get them hooked and out of there faster, and that allows us to look at the total ownership of the rail fleet and whether or not all the cars currently leased or in some cases owned are really needed. So in recent exercises we've done, we've been able to help people reduce their leased fleet by 20 to 25%. Now that's certainly not the standard, but it's pretty darn close to what we find on average. We've certainly had examples much higher than that, and then we have some clients that are pretty well run today, and they're not looking at that kind of improvement. But we're always yielding improvement. As Chuck said earlier, and as I said previously, we're an EBITDA fit-focused company, and a couple hundred cars or 1,000 cars out of your system at $2,500 to $2,800 a month, that'll add up in a hurry. Our sixth area of improvement is in the utilization of transportation management systems, particularly for over-the-road of movement of goods. There's three ways to gain access to a TMS. You can put in your own TMS for common carrier utilization. You can put in a TMS or optimize a TMS for private fleet. But you can also utilize a 4PL, which we're seeing an increasing number of chemical processors use. 4PL will give you access to the TMS. It also offloads the challenges of getting your freight booked, getting a driver on top of power and getting them into your yard to pick up your product on schedule and on time. So the TMS benefits are substantial. It's real-time updates to your private fleet of where your equipment is, where it's how fast it's processing challenges it's finding, and getting it turned and back to you. In the common carrier solution, the TMS is allowing you to do competitive automated bidding to pre-qualified partners, allowing you to have access to more partners based on your TMS provider's catalog of potential carriers. And it's doing a work burden removal that allows you to start to look at information as opposed to data. What is your real performance on on-time delivery? What is your real performance on on-time pickup? What is your real cost per mile to serve? What is your real performance profitability by customer from a total cost to serve perspective? The seventh area of opportunity is visual management in making sure that the performance of the organization is connected to the humans, making sure the human chain is fully aware of the performance of the organization, what the goals are, and how they are trending towards them. So when we talk about visual management, it could be as sophisticated as a control room scenario for a large shipper that has invested heavily in TMS, and it could be as unsophisticated as a production room where you're showing production yesterday, goal yesterday, your expected performance for the month, your progress to performance to the month, your key metrics as they're available, whether it be yesterday's metrics or week to date or month to date or last week's. One place where everyone on the team can see what the goals are, what their performance against the goals are, and then have the opportunity to try to remedy any gaps between those goals and your current performance. Very frequently, we run into organizations that don't have simple lean product practices, such as stand-up meetings in the morning to look at yesterday's performance, make sure they understand today's plan and their goals, and execute against them. Sometimes culturally that has not been acceptable, and sometimes it's just been we continue to do business the way we've always done business. The visual management of performance allows everyone, management, supervisors, senior management to simply see exactly where you are in any given moment in time, within whatever the reasonable amount of time is to collect the data, and without creating a substantial burden to collect that data. So the eighth area of opportunity is taking the visual management approach to the next level, which is pulling together all of the performance information available to you, not only transportation from a over the road, but from an ocean, but from a rail perspective in a single place, connecting all those partners so that your partners know what their performance is. You can see your complete operational perspective. You know if you're on time in your delivery, if you know if you're on time in your production, getting that full kind of eagle's eye view of what the truth really is. Best-in-class operators are striving to move to this level of performance in this platform from an E2E visibility perspective, and it's yielding substantial results, not only in terms of reducing surprises where you fail to hit customer windows of production or you fail to hit your cost standards, but we're not only limiting surprises, but creating the opportunity to remedy those gaps and trends that aren't allowing you to hit your targets. So, when we think about our practice at Argo, we think about how do we customize a solution to each individual client's problems? How do we bring expertise and tools to bear to deliver EBITDA? We're not going to write a white paper and leave it behind. We're going to analyze the problem, create an implementation plan, and execute against it in a timely, efficient manner. That's really what our practice is all about. I'm going to turn this back over to Rob, and thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you very much, Bruce, as well as Clarence and Chuck for really giving a great survey of the landscape there about the challenges that industry is facing here and what steps can be taken to start to mitigate concerns. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A, so please do use that dialog box to send in some questions. And we have a few. I guess we'll start with question for Clarence. And I guess in part you addressed this with the comment from the CN exec, but do you think PSR, precision railroading, is sustainable? And what stage of the implementation do you think the railroads are at with PSR?
Well, Rob, I think it varies from what stage you're in, from rail to rail. For example, CN is by far the most mature of the Class 1s. You look at their numbers that they reported today, and given the fact that we're in a declining freight market, CN was flat. When you look at CN's fuel consumption per 1,000 gross ton miles, they lead the industry by far. You look at their throughput, their velocity, their dwell time, they're making a comeback. A thing I always look at to see if anything is sustainable is the capital spend. And CN certainly had 2 years of great capital spend and expect now to get back to a neutral position, 17-18% of their revenue. CP being obviously the next place is the next farthest along, and they had spectacular numbers. And then CSX is moving well along. I think the ones that's maybe dragging a little bit could be NS, but I think both KCS and UP's made strides. So is it sustainable? It looks like it is. What about the capital spend? Is it, you hear rumors railroads are cutting back on capital spend. And I've worked for railroads that didn't spend a lot of capital, and I worked for railroads that spend a lot of capital. I think that's a measure of their health. And you got to be careful when you analyze these numbers about the capital, because PTC costs have been in the prior years. The subsequent years won't have that capital cost of PTC. Rather, they'll have the operating expense of the ongoing maintenance on that. And then, last, I'd like to say I have observed, now as really an outsider, the following. PTC comes in and it's all operations driven and screws up the world. And then things get straight. And then these marketing people, they got to figure out how to go and get business now to fill up this newfound capacity that's been created. And you can't do that in a vacuum. You have to do that in a partnership with your customers. And I think that's where a company like Argo can be very effective in that. They can get inside your operations, reduce your transit time, save you some dollars, jointly working. Most of their consultants will know the railroad people are dealing with, and I think it'll help you in your marketing negotiations on your rates and on what's expected out of you. I do this, you do that, and it's a give and take process. I hope that answered it.
Indeed. Bruce or Chuck, anything to add there? Or? No.
I think
the next.
I think what Clarence shared is very important in that, and if I could just add on one piece, the chemical processing industry has it within their own control to achieve the necessary performance to avoid these types of chargebacks, to avoid these cost structures. These are things that are within their control to optimize and drive change. And this is not something that's theoretical. These are practical projects that we execute on every day to help optimize the solution to satisfy the precision railroad challenge.
Okay. A question on the fees and fee structures. I know STB has become more active, or indicated that it may become more active. I guess we'll start with Clarence here as well. Do you think the railroads will be required to normalize or reduce their fee structures by the oversight authorities in the U.S. and Canada?
You used two words there. One was normalized. I'm not sure anyone would know what a normal rate is, and the other one is would they require them to do something? You have the STB board is authorized for 5 people. It currently has 3. There's 2 nominations that's been in Congress for some period of time, but I think you're going to see a more activist board. And the reason I think you're going to see a more activist board is twofold. One, I've listened to both Ann Begeman and Mr. Futch's speeches, and I just believe that they're going to become more activist. But number 2, I think that what their overall writing thing is to make sure the railroads are financially healthy. I think that the thing they're going to push is some type of compromise, some type of arbitration. Now, the arbitration that was proposed, not in this, but in some other rail-related matters, was what is commonly referred to as baseball arbitration. And in baseball arbitration, for those of you that's not familiar with it, you go in with your side, I go in with my side, the arbitrator picks one. You better hope you had a good side because you're tossing the coin. As opposed to the National Grain and Feed Association's model, which is more of a mediation type process, but in fact is binding on both parties. So I think that they'll end up, if this trend continues, I believe the STB will end up with some type of arbitration process, not rate control. Did I lose you?
Sorry about that. Yes, next question. Question on positive PTC technology, positive train control. And do you think that tracking, tracing, and ETAs will ever be linked and delivered via PTC technology? I guess we'll start with Clarence there, and then Bruce, if you have any comments.
I think it's going to help because you're going to know within 2 inches of where the train is, and your computer systems, if matched and linked up, should know what cars are on the train. So, within think about this thing. This is a GPS-based system that when you have 2 tracks, side-by-side double tracks, that the centers of them are 11 feet apart, this GPS system can differentiate which train is which. That's pretty good. And so I know of no reason why that can't be done, and I know of no reason why that shouldn't be done through apps, so you can track and trace while you're home, while you're on your iPad, while you're on your iPhone. I think it's just part of ease of doing business.
Right. And a question on, I'll put the chart back up. The chart on the rail line, rail carrier fees. What drove that gain for CSX in 2018 over 2017? Clarence, any views on that? Why did CSX have that dramatic increase? Looks like 35-40% there in 2018.
Well, CSX is on record, so I don't have any insider information. Everything I'm telling you is a matter of printed information.
Right.
CSX is on record as having stated that they are now enforcing demurrage and storage and detention rules that have been in effect for a long period of time that were not enforced or were mitigated or sometimes written off by the former sales and marketing people, that would be me, and that they were simply towing the line and, in fact, in some cases had raised those accessorial charges.
Right. I guess we'll start with Bruce on this one. How do you know what transportation management system is best for your company?
That's a very good question. So the first part of the analysis that Argo does, and I'm not familiar with other consulting companies or other options to select a TMS, is we look at the modes of transportation, the frequency of movement, the number of physical sites being utilized, whether it's a private fleet or common carrier solution, and then we map that to our current. We keep a comprehensive list of all the solutions in the marketplace, and we map it to the low-cost solution that provides all the required capabilities that the client's looking for. So some clients are looking for real-time data updates of where the piece of equipment is at all time. Some folks are looking for mobile tracking that they can have on their phone. They can access to it. Some folks are looking for exception reporting only. So it depends on what the client's looking for, the number of sites, the number of moves, the type of commodity, and what they are looking for information. We match that to the what we keep as our capabilities matrix for the current TMS products out in the marketplace. We run a comprehensive RFP against the top 3 or 4 solutions, and then we have the clients engaged the entire time, making sure that all of their needs are satisfied at the optimal cost level. And when I say optimal cost, it's not only the cost of the software, but it's the cost to implement the software, making sure that it's accepted by the organization, that the change management piece is taken into account, and that it's utilized at a very high level by the internal team at the client site. I hope that answers that question.
Right. Indeed. Great. The question on the constraints, particularly around the U.S. Gulf Coast and the ship channel in particular, what are the options for, when viable, seeking out alternative routes, either through the East Coast or the West Coast? And I guess Bruce and then maybe Clarence there, are chemical makers starting to look seriously at alternate channels outside of the Houston ship channel and to avoid some of the congestion on the Gulf Coast?
Well, I would say that they're not starting to. They have been. As Chuck discussed earlier this afternoon, the amount of capital projects coming online in the last 2 years and the number that are coming online in the next 2 years is incredibly incredibly significant. And as Clarence shared, the Houston Ship Channel cannot handle it all. So you're going to have challenges not only on ocean congestion in the Port of Houston, you're going to have rail congestion around Port Arthur, and that's going to spread. So people looking at alternatives in Norfolk and Savannah. Clarence, I think you have a very practical example you might be able to share.
Yeah, we had a customer then headquartered in Texas that had a large warehousing operation in Texas. And that customer bought warehousing operations in Norfolk, Hampton Roads area and in Savannah. And the deal was to ship, in this example, plastic pellets in hopper cars, covered hopper cars, to both those ports. And then they had multiple options in that warehouse. They could put them in super sacks and then put them in bulk ships there at the Port of Savannah, or both at Savannah and at Norfolk. They had the ability to load into bags if you wanted it loaded into bags. So to bag the product, palletize the product, and put it in a container. And what the steamship lines were offering was some reduced steamship line freight because they would have surplus empties, for example, at the Port of Savannah, or they may have surplus empties at the port and Hampton Roads area, and it enabled them then to fill those containers at those locations. I would also say that in the interim, and this is again is where a company like Argo could help you. If you've got storage in transit, or if you see that you're going to have to store cars for any period of time, approach some of these short lines. Their business is down as well as these Class 1s, and they will store these cars for you cheap. And then when you need to get them switched out, they'll switch them out for you. You don't get a big switch charge. You're probably not going to get a Class 1 that's going to want to do that very much.
Correct.
I hope that helps.
Indeed. And before we wrap, we're at the top of the hour, so we'll have one final question and then wrap up. I think this is probably best suited to Bruce, but if anyone else wants to join in, please do. Question on, can you explain why car cycle time analysis would reduce the life cycle going forward? Bruce, question for you there.
Sure. So, I'm going to use an old story here, is that you turn the light on the closet and you see Granny, and you didn't know she was in there. A lot of the ability to make improvement is having facts and data. So the challenge here is, without understanding exactly what the true performance is for life cycle of your cars, you don't know where to act first. Whether it's customers retaining cars for long periods of time, or whether you find out that the car's inside your fence in your yard for long periods of time. So the ability to get to a single basis of fact starts to point out the opportunities. What we do in our practice is we start to rate those opportunities based on effort and reward. And very quickly, when you present to the management team that their cars are taking 170 to 195 days to get back, people get energized and want to take action. And we often find that what a management team's belief of the cycle time on their cars is, and what the real measurement is over a large sample size is very, very different, sometimes startling. So it's a matter of having a fact basis to execute against. That's the largest reason why this is a very straightforward exercise.
Great. And Clarence or Chuck, anything on that question?
No, I think it's good.
Great. Good. All right.
No.
If not, thank you very much, Chuck. Thank you, Clarence, and thank you, Bruce. Thank you for your time and your expertise here. And most importantly, thank you to everyone on the webcast for listening. We'll have an on-demand version of the webcast, a replay that you can access on ChemWeek's site. That will be up by early evening today, and you can share the link that you used to log in so other colleagues can listen. And again, thank you very much, and have a great day. Thank you all.